Today we're going to talk about how to make a very cool fear tracker for your Daggerheart games. For Daggerheart, one of the key things that I'm tracking as a DM is fear. You have up to 12 units of fear, and you get to spend those and accrue those over a combat, a scene. And it's really important to keep track of that. And ideally, you want your players to see that, right? If they can see it as a tangible thing, it will create the play experience, right? It will help that play experience drive it one way or the other to realize, oh, there's a ton of fear or there's very little fear. That helps play. Also helps you as DM. There are a number of ways we can do this, right? The game itself recommends like you could just put colored bits in a bowl, and some of the sets that they sell provide these things. Another tool you could use as a fear tracker is one of these types of number trackers. You can find these for sale as a sort of Magic the Gathering life counter or other things like that, number counters. You can find these online in various places. This one came with one of the D&D dice sets, maybe Ravnica. So you can just, turn it and it's got a little place where it shows what's active. And so you could say like one side is fear or they're both fear because it could go to 12. So I could use this to track fear. Similarly, you could have a number tracker like this. This is one that I got online. You can see it has 3 different numbers and you can spin them to set the number that you have. That could be something like the first 2 numbers are fear and the other one is something else. And like the number of rounds of combat or something like that. Those are useful, but they are hard to read at a distance and you kind of have to sit there and fidget with it. I like the abacus style a lot more than these. But this again can be a very low cost, easy, don't have to make it yourself option. I'm going to add here that, I'm focusing on the GM who wants to run the game and track fear. That is sort of the big thing that you're tracking. But players also can have things to track. And that's where something like this can be pretty handy. Your character sheet has a lot to track on it. And you'll kind of wear out those zones as a player as you start to, endlessly write armor, erase armor, track hit points, track stress, erase hope. So a little tracker like this can be pretty cool. I got this from Schooner Labs off of Etsy, and it's called the Custom Daggerheart Console. It even comes in a bundle of 6 of them. It's not super cheap, but it is really nicely made. Shout out to them. You can set your total here, and then you can actually set where you currently are, so you know where the limit is, right? So if you had a total stress that can be of 6 and hit points of 6, and then you can just easily move the slide around, but you've already got your maximum set. Very nicely made. I really like the quality of this. Highly recommend that item if you want. I'll put a link in my show notes. There are other such trackers, but this one really caught my eye as being one of the best ones. And I got some for other players in our campaign. So on the player side, you've got a lot of things to track like that you want to keep track of and maybe not be continually erasing your character sheet. Another option is wet erase if you like doing that. Put your character sheet in a binder and use a wet erase pen. That also works well. Very cheap. But, on the DM side, that key thing is tracking that fear. They've got an upcoming DM screen where they're going to provide a sort of abacus style tracker that will work by sort of putting little gemstones into the top of the DM screen so you can visually represent it. And I like that a lot because the thing with the bowl with little chits in it is that bowl, you can't add it up super easily. You just get a general sense of a lot or a little, but both as DM and player, you're not entirely sure how many are in there. And so I like an abacus style tracker a little better because it's really visual and the actual movement can be sort of exciting, right? And so what I'm going to walk through is the process I went through for creating this guy. And you can see this is one of 2 that I built. You'll see the differences as I put them together. And this is the end product. Or the final version. And you can see that, I can easily slide across to say, okay, I have 4 fear currently, or I have 5 fear. Oh, I'm going to spend 1. I'm going to spend another, right? You can track that. It's very visual and cool looking. This was relatively cheap to do, relatively easy to do. One of my friends, when I showed this off at a gaming table last week, and I gave one to my DM and kept one for myself, one of my friends said, wow, you're good at woodworking. And I said, no, I'm not good at woodworking. Varnish makes you look good, and that is exactly what we're going to talk about during this process, is how to take steps so that it looks like you know what you're doing, even if you don't have great skills at this. If you can saw stuff, if you can use a drill, then this is a way to do it. But also what I hope is that this video will inspire you to make your own version, right? I chose these raven skulls after talking to my DM and saying, hey, I'm going to make you one for Christmas. What would you like on it? And we looked at various options, but there's some neat things out there. There are tombstones, there are skulls of little human skulls, and any number of colored beads and things like that. And so really, you could make this tool a lot of different ways. And we'll talk about that, especially because I made a version that can be used in on top of my magnetic DM screen as well. So if you saw my Draw Steel video, I was thinking of that as I created this one. All right, so let's jump into the process and look at what I bought, how it all comes together, so that you can use this for your plans.
First thing you need is something that you're going to use as your abacus-like parts, and that's where I went with this particular raven skull imitation pieces, and they're really cool because they actually come already with a hole in them, so we don't even have to drill. And if you needed to, you could use a secondary hole if you wanted to have an angle to it, which is pretty sweet. They're really nice quality. You can see it looks very bone-like. It already has this sort of shading to it with the beak. Really, really excellent. So I think it really fits that fear tracker concept. Awesome. Next up, we need some doll-style clothespins. So these are nice because they have a channel that opens up, as you can see here, making it easy to drop down over a DM screen. Now I have a wooden DM screen, as I've shown in other videos, so that won't work. I'll be doing a little bit of a change here to use it on my screen. But if you have a typical screen, it's going to have a gap of about this size, and this will just slip nicely over a DM screen. So here's our DM screen, and you can see this just slips right over it very nicely, very stable. Looking at how the clothespin slips over, you can see it's very sturdy because of the length, right? It's going very far down. If you have a different kind of DM screen, then you'll need to measure what that width is and see whether this doll type will work. There are other types of clothespins out there. I just know this works really nicely, but it will not work if it's too thick. Last part we need is the steel rod. And so you could get a stainless steel rod if you can find that, but it's hard to find in longer segments. I got a pretty long one just so I could make sure that it would work. I wasn't sure if I'd need two of them together, which is a possibility. But I went with 1/8 of an inch, which is a little pliable. You could also go with 3/16 if you want it to be thicker, but it just means it's digging into your wood a little more. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. And what's going to end up happening, right, is you're going to have these two pegs, and we're going to drill into them such that we have our 12 fear trackers, because that's the maximum number of fear, linked between the two. We might end up going to the base to drill them more easily there. And that works pretty well. This works just fine the way it is. You can see that depending on what you choose to hang, like if it's a skull or something like that, it may be that you find that they don't hang well. So these hang really nice, right? They kind of, the natural balance of it is such that it's leaning forward a bit, which is really excellent. But if these didn't lean nicely, if they leaned sort of either too far forward because of the balance, or worse, too far backwards, then we might need a second bar underneath. And that's why I got such a long piece of metal, was I was worried that these might, the weight of them could possibly be too far away. And I wanted them to be leaning a little bit forward, but I actually think they're just fine with a single bar. And so I'll just need to drill into that and put 12 of them on here, and we're set. Last thing we want to do before we are cutting anything is to measure out how far we want this to sit. And so you can see here, I've got all 12 on the rod. I'm just holding it and sort of thinking through, depending on where you think those pegs are going to go on your DM screen of choice, how far apart they want to be, such that you can have all 12 together with enough space. So here's a example of if I have this drilled in about around this distance, I have a pretty good gap, which is what I want between the two, such that I know which is my active fear. This can be that I have 4 fear or 5 fear currently, and then that means I have these 7 over here in reserve, and I can slide them across like an abacus and still have enough space. Or I might, widen this further out and just give it a little more space. So you want to, depending on what you're placing on the bar, space that out, measure it, put it on a table and think about where you want to be, and then we're going to mark it off. In my case, I'm going to be using my wooden DM screen as an option, but also with the option to put it on the table. And so here I'm thinking if I have that peg sitting on here with a magnetic piece, how that distance will be. And, you can see that this will just, it'll be good enough. It's not a huge space in between them, but that will be good enough. If I cut it to the size of this top surface on my center screen, that'll be fine. To make the holes, we're going to drill. It's a 1/8 rod, so we're going to do a 1/8 inch drill hole. So we're just going to put it in there and drill away. And what we end up with, and we're just going just a really, shallow height. We're just getting, just a small little hole in there. It doesn't go too deep in there. Just going not even halfway should be fine. Just enough to put, some glue and secure it. And what we want to do is line it up with this, especially if you have a DM screen that you're going to put on top of. Then you want that to ride on the DM screen and the pole to go, along parallel to this groove, right? So that it's perpendicular to the view. It's going to go onto the screen and come out. If you have a different angle for some sort, then you'll have to figure that out and mark it, with a pencil and then drill the hole there. We can sand this out and then put the piece into there to secure it with some glue. All right, I've marked the segment, the length that I need. And so I'm just going to use a metal hacksaw to cut that steel rod and get the size that I need. So it took a lot more coats than I thought it would, particularly because this part here, you can see it on this guy a little, it kind of stains differentially and even got a little tacky there, which happens. But I'm generally pretty happy with how it came, reasonably even for what we're doing application-wise. And I've got my 2 different sets. And so I will now seal those. Here they are drying after a varnish move. I haven't really talked about what I use for either the stain or the varnish because it really just depends. And it's not a critical piece for something like this. Really, the most important part for me is low toxicity, ease of cleanup. So I tend to use water soluble rather than something that requires a thinner to clean because it'll just be a bigger problem. One small tip: if you do use things that have to require that are oil-based paints, and you like an oil-based stain, and you have to clean up and using a small brush for a project like this, one thing you can actually do is spray it with Windex or similar window cleaner. It'll break down things enough, and then rinse it with water. Then you get the brush will stay soft, and you can use that for your successive projects. So you don't have the toxicity that comes with like mineral spirits or other ways that you're going to clean it. So if you can keep things to low VOC, to water soluble, to clean up with water, that'll be a lot better for your project and your toxicity. Keep it in a ventilated area. So I'm in the garage, with the garage doors open. That all makes it a lot easier to do these kinds of projects. And if you can smell it, it's not the only indicator, but it is an indicator that you want to keep things ventilated and not stay in the room too long, and make sure that it's not getting into your house. Don't do projects like this in your house. Do it outside so that you're not contaminating your whole house. If you must do it in your house for things like, freezing temperatures or something like that, then open up all those windows to that area. Make sure it's really cleared out before you resume. All right. So now I'm just going to let this dry. I might do another coat or two, depending. I also have to do the part that's, in contact. I didn't do the heads yet, so I'll go back and do those, and then it'll be fully varnished, and I'll let that fully dry. Our next step is a drop of super glue, and we put the rod through that to make sure it's nice and adhered in there. And then we are going to now put these guys through the pole and put on the last bit, and then it'll be all set. So here's the finished fear tracker. You can see we've got a total of 12. So we can move one of these across whenever fear is gained and just slowly start accumulating that fear. We can move several at a time without much issue. Slides nicely on that bar, and then as fear is spent, return it back to the pool. And it creates a nice visual way that we can count both as GM and as players to see how much fear there is at any given time. Pretty cool for a project overall. It was not too much work. Here's the view from the back of the screen, also pretty nice. Now, for my own version of this fear tracker, I'm going to have the option to either have magnets on the bottom and put on top of my DM screen, or to put it on a wooden base in front of me. So that is what I'm doing here. I'm going to cut this later to make it smaller, but for now I'm just putting in the holes. So I measured
what the size of this bottom piece is. And I started drilling a piece just using, a very large drill bit to make that hole. I'm going to widen it a little bit more so it fits snugly, but not too snugly. And then later I'll, paint and I'll sand, paint, and or varnish this like I did, similar to how I did with these. So that's what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make this just a little wider. I like the depth of it is good. It didn't come through. And I'll try to do that on the other side of this piece of wood so that I have that base. So I created 2 sets, and when I was working on the second set, I found that what works really well is actually to just drill a hole through the wood. And when you're actually using this clothespin version versus the shorter one, you can see that it fits really easily there, and it's not going to fall over because the wood's thick enough to hold it. And so it's going to nicely go in there and actually hang above it, which is kind of cool. So I kind of like how that came out. Now, once it'll be a little tighter fit once I add the once I stain this and varnish it, but should still fit nicely. And the idea is I do want it to be removable, so you can put it on a DM screen or on this flat board. So that's kind of neat. I like how that went. So again, to do this, I just drilled all the way through the wood with something that was just a tiny bit larger than this, and then I just used a circular file to just kind of work through. I used both a fine file and a thicker file to just sort of work through this. So depending on what tools you have on hand, you might find a different way to do it or just use a slightly different side. And I think you could it doesn't have to be super snug to work. So here you see the final version all lacquered up. I put on that varnish, and so you can see now the full fear tracker and what it looks like. So this is the version that I can put a magnet on the bottom of here and put it on the board. I can also remove it, as you can see here, so that I can put a magnet underneath and put it on top of my existing board. This one, because of the fact that I cut it to use the magnets, it sits lower, sits on the wood here. But you can see here, how I slide it across. And so as fear accumulates, I can just move it across there. I think that looks really cool. Very low profile, very cool. Now here's my second one. Here, again, the pegs come out. But when I put it in this base, if I want it on a base, you can see it's nice. These are free swinging, right? So very cool. And again, I can just move my fear as it accumulates there. So I end up with 4 fear and then pull it back. Both these trackers have 12 fear. You can see, really nice. And I really like how the wood came out on this. So the stain and the varnish look really good. And of course I can take this out and then I can put it up on the DM screen if I want to have it up here instead. So as you can see here, it is on top of a screen and just leaves the base behind to be used whenever you want it. So very cool. I'm really happy with how this project came out. I have 2 different fear trackers. One is going for a friend. And you can see that concept of whether you want it to be a version that's going to go on a screen most of the time. But hey, you've got the flexibility pretty easy with just one more piece of wood to have it on its own independent base. Or if you want it to be magnetic so that it can go on top of that DM screen that I have there, you can see my draw steel magnetic pieces over on the side there. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video looking at creating that custom fear tracker. I really love how this came out. I think it's really neat. I like the choice of these raven skulls. There are a lot of good ways to good things that you could use for this, but these are particularly nice. I like how they hang naturally pretty well. Their sense of balance is really good. So even if they're not hitting a piece of wood, they hang in a way that's really good. They come pre-drilled, so you don't have to worry about drilling the plastic, which is one of the things with different size skulls. You might have to be very careful about how you drill them. The size bar, I think that ended up being a really nice diameter. I'd seen another video that used a slightly larger one, but I liked this size is good. It maybe is a little flexible because of that size, but that shouldn't be any problem at all. It'll keep well. The idea of making it convertible, where I can take out the piece and put it with a magnet on top of my DM screen, I think is pretty neat. I may or may not do that. Truth be told, I may just keep it this way. It depends on how much I want to use a DM screen. I like DM screens because I like to have all my cheat sheets for what I'm doing with the game and with the characters. So campaign notes, character notes, rules notes, right? The list of skills or things like that. And not in Daggerheart, but in other games. So I often use a DM screen for all of those bits. So if I do that, I'll probably use the magnetic version. If not, I'll put it in front of me. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this tool. If you end up making a fear tracker, let me know how it went. I've really enjoyed hearing folks who have made their version of my Draw Steel initiative tracker. This has been a lot of fun. I guess I need another RPG that needs a cool tool like this. But I hope this has been helpful, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.